Everybody goes through their own path, but there's a common woods or common forest. And so even though they may be taking their own pathway through the forest, there's other people that have gone through before. And so there's some wisdom that's been gained.
3 years ago, I woke up in this forest. I was diagnosed with cancer. I was shocked, I was scared, I thought I was going to die. This program is about people living with cancer, how they feel, how they think, living with cancer, emotional perspectives.
Well, my first thought was I have to see my children grow up. I mean, this isn't fair. I want to see them grow up. And that was the toughest part.
I felt frustrated. I didn't feel mad so much, I just felt frustrated. I didn't feel that my cancer came because I'd done something bad in my life, because I'd sinned in one way or another, because I trespassed in one way or another, because I'd done something wrong in one way or another. I felt that this was random chance. It just came along and hit me.
One of the problems is when you have cancer, nobody lets you be scared. They're always telling you, oh, you know, you got to think positively, you can beat this.
I was in shock. I just staggered out of the office afterwards.
It was very shocking for me. I just remember thinking, it's a dream and I'll wake up from it eventually, and it can't be true.
One day you think you're fine, I'm a downtown lawyer, doing okay, and the next day I've been told that I have incurable metastasized colon cancer. I finally realized, okay, I've only got so many days on this earth, and I'm not going to waste them anymore sitting in a cubicle in a big downtown office building, staring out the window and grinding through stuff that is numbing my brains.
I didn't say, why me? That's one thing I didn't do. I said, okay, I have another challenge, and I have to deal with it.
I haven't beaten this thing, but I'm still of value. My life still has worth.
It sure as hell was a shock. It was a shock more to my family and friends than to me. I mean, I found myself handling it a bit more. I think the fact that I had to deal with my family and friends during that time made it easier to handle.
I'll get up and instead of brushing my teeth today, I'll go have my chemo.
And it's really hard for you to sit there and just watch it.
Just get mad, because otherwise I realize that it bottles up here and it affects the whole rest of my life, and I don't want it to. I don't want to give cancer that power.
The patients want to feel that he or she will be given the best possible chance to win this war, and it's a war.
I think in order to get through treatment, sometimes you have to put aside some of your emotions, and it's very hard if you're very emotional when you're going through it to deal with the physical aspects of it.
Let's take a walk down the corridor into the ward.
This is the chemo clinic, and at this desk here is where the nurses would be working from and preparing the medications that they'll be giving you. As you look around in this area, we have both stretcher beds and chairs over to the far left. And depending on the length of time that you're in the clinic, how you're feeling, we can put you in probably the lounge chair tomorrow, but if you're wanting to lie down and rest through your therapy, we can put you into a stretcher bed.
I'd go in there and then I'd see a long needle or something like that, or before me another person would come out crying, or a little boy or girl, and I guess it'd make it worse, but everybody tell me, oh, they're not that bad.
I wasn't sure what to expect. All I knew about it was what I'd read and what I'd seen on television, sort of thing, that I would get hooked up to an IV and I would probably feel bad for a week after, but the reality of it was a little different. I mean, it was a lot more of it wasn't quite the down atmosphere I thought it would be. A lot of people accepting of, you know, what they have and what their treatment's going to be, and talking to them kind of helped a lot. A lot of it is what's inside you. I mean, how you feel about what you're going through as far as treatment's concerned, how you feel about what your chances are, how you feel. It's almost complete attitude, and I know that sounds like a cliche. I mean, I hear people saying that all the time, but you know, you have to say that for everything in your life, don't you? That if you sit back and wait for something to happen, then something bad's going to happen to you. If you kind of accept that you have to do something and take it for the best, then you'll get through it. And that's kind of the attitude I'm taking, is that, you know, I don't particularly like going on this chemotherapy, but I know that it's doing me a lot of good.
You know, nausea-wise and or exhaustion-wise, although they tend to be cumulative. That's the only other thing I would say, is that so you might not be too tired this month, but next month you might find it a little more.
I feel quite sick as the week goes on, feel quite sick and lose about 4 days of my life to gravel so that I'm not vomiting, so I can keep food down.
The hardest thing for me probably was when I'd be embarrassed that my mom would throw up when she was walking me to school.
The big issue seemed to be maybe hair loss or something like that. You know, kids can be cruel, and not that I ever had anyone be mean to me, but I had people be curious and in funny ways ask their questions, or, you know, grab my hat to take a look or whatever, when if they had asked me, I would have been very good with telling people.
Well, the treatment's making me sterile. I may already be sterile from it, but Sally and I did sperm banking. Actually, we had planned to start a family sometime at the start of in about 1.5 years, 2 years, and that's really been moved up by this. We've said, you know, well, you never know when something like this is going to happen. Why don't we wait for me to get better and for them to tell me that I'm in remission? And once that happens, then we're going to start a family. So that's really pushed that sort of thing up.
Jacob is 18 months old and was 4 years in the making and the trying. And I waited 2 years after when I finally had surgery. It was after that 5-year period, and then I waited another 2 years before I started trying to have a child. So I was almost 46 when I had him. So, and lots of people told me it was time to give up.
Me. Just because I had this abnormal drive to live.
But it didn't matter what I did. It always came, or how much I denied that I could do anything to help myself. I always came back to that sense. But I know I'm not going to die.
When it's a child, you feel totally helpless. And how I remember actually how I did get through it was I had to know everything. I drove them nuts. I asked them questions about every single thing. I had to know everything about our medicine. I had to know everything about exactly how much a drip was supposed to be running. I mean, I probably went overboard. I kept a journal I wrote in every single day. There's three journals full of all her stuff when she was going through that 27 months. And it was a control issue because I had no control over the cancer. So the only control I did have was over being involved in looking after her. And I think I shut down a lot emotionally. It was the only way to get through things.
I think my advice would be get control. That's the first thing, because when I was first diagnosed, I felt really out of control because I was brushed into everything. And until I went around and talked to a lot of people who've been through this experience, then I felt like I was in control, because I could say, you know, I could look at this person and go, well, they've been through surgery, they've been through chemo. 20 years later, they're still here.
Let's go and look at the pathway of remission.
Then when I realized I wasn't going to die, I wasn't sure how I was going to live without having a leg. And I was really active in sports, and I liked running and all these kind of things, and I wasn't going to be able to do a lot of the stuff that I'd done before.
I was very taken aback when the treatment finished. From the emotional point of view, it was, well, how do we live? What point of view do we take on life now? You know, life is significantly different. You cannot count on your body for sure anymore. You can't count on living till you're 80 or 90 like other people your age. Life just looks very different. I feel good about having gotten through it. I think for women, especially, it's more like what men describe as their army experience. When you finish boot camp, you feel like, whew, I wouldn't want to do that again, but you feel good that you got through it. I think the key is to acknowledge that there is an emotional side to the whole experience. I think 30, 40 years ago, that whole emotional side of the experience was completely denied. Now we don't deny it, but you will not get the help you need in dealing with that unless you seek out that help.
So this is a place they can take their mask off at the door and come in and be themselves. And I think there's a yearning in all of us to be our true selves. And it's hard to find a place where people will genuinely care about that and care about all the feelings, whether they're positive, whether they're angry, whether they're sad, whether they're facing a new recurrence of illness, whether they're close to death. The place where everything is accepted as it is, without judgment.
Sometimes on this journey, you have to go down the same pathway again and again and again. Let's go and have a look at recurrence.
The fear, of going through that process of dying and living with cancer. Because for me, it'll always be in the back of my mind. Is this, slight distension of my stomach? Is this the cancer coming back?
I had 4 months of treatment, chemotherapy, and then I had 8 weeks of radiation, and I was in remission for 2 years. And then my tumor marker started coming back up, and we couldn't find out where it was. If I had a twin sister with identical cancer and we were getting the identical drugs, we would both react differently. So you wouldn't necessarily react the way that I did. We have used most of the traditional things, and we're kind of hoping for a couple of things like Hercedrin, and there's another one in the East to come along and see if it's the one that'll do the trick, because there is one out there.
I think in those ways, it's certainly put me closer in touch with my own mortality and thinking about death more, particularly the second diagnosis.
So I was walking through all these corridors, and I said, "What?" And he said, "There really isn't anything else they can do for you."
And you see me sitting here all cheery and happy, and because that's the kind of person I am, and that's how I want to be remembered, and that's how I want to live my life. But it is really a tough road. It is a tough road to go down and day after day deal with a terminal illness. It's really, really tough. And the people who live that life, they need support, and they need to be cheered on that, hey, good for you, what you're doing, how you're handling this.
Sometimes the stories in this forest don't have a happy ending. Let's go and look down the pathway of terminal diagnosis.
So I think I can appreciate that it isn't appropriate to have an atmosphere of doom and gloom in cancer facilities, but this hyped up, isn't life great, that really ticks a person off when you're not feeling great. That's important, I think, to honor all of the feelings, the fun ones, the positive feelings, they're great, but the times of anger and just wailing are just as important. That even if cure and longevity isn't an issue, that there can still be quality of life, and that is just as honorable and as important as cure. So, the life quilt was my personal dream. I was certainly aware of how the act of working on a quilt drew people together, and it seemed like such an appropriate metaphor for community. And it really was my community of friends and family that enabled me to, to weather out the really awful times. But I think it has, speeded up the distilling of who I am, what it is that I was created for.
in a way, there's an intellectual way of looking at it, and then there's what's felt from the heart. So there's a lot of crying and a lot of despair when you're hugging your children and your husband and you know that you are terminally ill. But I would rather leave my sons and my husband with the memories of me trying to live today than to go into a depression that will kill me sooner than the disease. But we have to say to oneself, well, what do we have? And what I have is right now.
Sometimes it's hard, and you need help. Let's go and find out where we might be able to find some help.
You know, the benefit is that you get to have this intimate relationship with somebody. There's no fluff around anymore. It's all around very, very important and real things. But that's also a very confronting personal place to be, because it makes me think about my own family and life and you know, how fragile that is and how precious it is, and are you really living the way you want to every day, because it's real. People get sick and people die.
Cancer can wave a magic brush over lives, and I suspect that there are people whose lives it has poisoned who've never gotten over it, but those aren't the people that I meet.
Her car was parked in front of the house, and it just, like, I wanted to stop the truck there because I didn't want to have to get out and face the rest of it. And I did. And it was scary because, I mean, right away you just think, that's it, that's all. But it wasn't.
We faced a life crisis. We realized we might not be together. And that's the hard part for me, was thinking of leaving her. But I think we came through that knowing that whatever happened, we'd be okay. And that wasn't it wonderful that we've had this life together.
And I remember some moments of saying, you know, in a rage, you know, you are not cancer. You are more than cancer, you know, and cancer is not our lives. And yet, in some ways, it was true that cancer had become so much a part of our lives. And almost needing to have a moratorium some evenings and saying, we're going to rent a video, and for an hour and a half, we're not going to be focused on cancer.
And I am different. You know, you can't help but grow and to change and to adapt. You know, when you go through grief, you come out of it and you can't help but feel that something was left behind, but something new emerges.
You know, I couldn't have had a more positive husband and a more healthy and somebody who wanted to live more. You know, it doesn't work that way necessarily. So yes, I think realism is very important. Not pessimism necessarily, but realism.
You have to let them go, and whatever it is that they want to do, you know, you have to respect that.
I was really glad that I could be really honest with my kids. And I told them pretty well everything from day one, what was happening. I didn't hide anything, and I told him the day that he came home from his birthday, and that night I told him that he probably wouldn't live.
Like, I didn't really know, like, if my mother was going to survive or not, even though I was obviously hoping she would. And it would have been helpful if they'd talked to me, yeah.
There may have been resources for my children, but if there were, I certainly didn't know about them. And my doctors, although they were very caring, were busy. It certainly wasn't their focus to figure out the emotional pain. They were trying to do what they could to heal me. So that was a real gap.
In our medical training, that's another thing that we're taught, that death is, you know, something to be fought against and feared. And so that armoring, that tightening ourselves against that outcome creates a lot of fear in us. And when we operate from a place of fear, that keeps us separate from other people. And I think that creates a lot more suffering.
There's a fine line between getting too attached emotionally otherwise to the patient, because then I may get hurt. I may suffer if I am to lose you. And if this happens, you see, after the patient goes and I hurt, there is another patient who waits for the same affection, for the same thing. So it is a two-way street.
I don't think it's their primary concern to deal with the emotional aspects, but I don't think that they ignore them altogether. I think it was probably my own sense of looking like I was dealing with everything and coping so well that people didn't think about bringing up that possibility.
Part of the reason is that this culture of medicine, some people would distinguish it as a patriarchal model, that it's a classic patriarchal model, which is powerful, all-knowing, uncomfortable with uncertainty and chaos, whereas and that's the distortion of the male. That's, you know, what our culture has done to the male. The feminine, on the other hand, of which I think palliative care is a good example, is about feeling comfortable with uncertainty, surrendering to the mystery, and recognizing that it's okay to not be powerful. So I think that's where some of the difficulty in our training and our letting go of that model. It's such an entrenched model in our culture in general, and specifically in medicine.
So this macho thing is, I can deal with it. I'm fine. I wish other men kind of took the wall down and just lowered it and said, I need help. Please, can we talk?
The patient feels that he or she needs the help all the time. I can provide support for a very brief moment. I can see the patient, can devote half an hour, and then I'll see the patient 2 weeks later. Well, what about in between?
The purpose of the group is to assist people who've been diagnosed with cancer to cope with the effects, not merely of the illness, but also the diagnosis itself. When someone receives a diagnosis of cancer, it's a very traumatic experience. It's not something that one expects. And it causes some very deep psychological and emotional reactions to take place, some of which are, there is a sense of alienation, of being cut off from others. There's certainly the numbness of the traumatizing experience to cope with. People who've received a diagnosis of cancer are extremely vulnerable.
Shall we say cancer survivors, and it's not just about health professionals. We've tried to bring those two groups together in order to give more to the people that come to us, and also to try and break the barriers down that exists. It's not them and us. We're all in it together in a sense.
If people are given the information, the education, and the support from the day one and address the needs of the entire family, I think that the treatment itself will be accepted better. The person will go through treatment much easier. Then when they get to that last day of chemo or radiation, which often they say is their worst day, not always their best, there'll be a roadmap to recovery or to whatever process that they're in at that time. But we can support them from the day they're diagnosed instead of leaving them out there to find their own way.
When I found out about the relaxation group, I was in the middle of my chemotherapy, and my reaction was, oh my goodness, this is so wonderful. Where was this? How come nobody told me about this 3 months ago when I was diagnosed? And the whole process of being diagnosed is so stressful. How come I didn't know about that then?
It's a healing circle. It's a healing journey for people that come there. People get knowledge, companionship, and support. It's also a time where people check in, let us know how they're doing. And it's also an opportunity for them to co-create the relaxation session with us. They bring their own images, their words, their ideas, so that we can weave those into the relaxation session itself, the guided imagery that we do. We go to mats and they spend 45 minutes on a mat with the lights dimmed. Most of the time we have a music therapist, so we have live music during that 45 minutes. And I or another facilitator will do a guided session. When we're relaxed, the body doesn't need to do that, and the body can be in its own healing potential. So it's a very mind-body connection that happens in that 45 minutes. And we use a lot of their imagery to do that. But for the most part, it's well established here as not as an alternative therapy for patients, but as a complement to their treatment.
So what the Canadian Cancer Society tries to do is link up those support volunteers with the clinical side of what people face when they're diagnosed with cancer, so they can have an even balance between dealing with all of the physical issues and dealing with the emotional issues that they're going through as well.
It is after the battle that they need a lot of support. It's like when you're in the battle, I find that the patients are easier to handle because they said, you take X number of treatments, and they go through it. But then as they come off the treatment, and they all feel naked and vulnerable, and they say, what if something happens? So I think these other groups and supports are very essential, the way I see it, not only helping me, but helping the patients and the family and relatives. And they have to carry on for a certain period of time. Of course, if everything ends up on a positive note, the tincture of time is the best healer.
Let's go and take a look down the pathway of long-term survivors.
I like that metaphor of a stream, of an ongoing, flowing.
It'll be 20 years this fall. Right. Yeah, amazing. And I was given not a very good chance of living very long with 11 lymph nodes involved.
I think everyone's experience with it is different, and it depends on your environment and how you're going to be affected by it. But in general, it's going to be a really, really tough road. But I think a critical part is positive thinking and really believing that everything's going to be fine. And I think that many times is what kept me hanging in there. Just my parents, I was young, but they always encouraged me to think positively about any kind of situation. If it was really painful what I was going through, that whole method of thinking really helped me. I think it was just as important as the chemotherapy I went through. It was just as important as the rehabilitation. It was the way I was thinking. So I would just tell them to surround themselves with positive people and people that are really strong.
I really hadn't lived until I got cancer. And cancer gave me the permission, well, maybe I don't have much time, so I can do this and I can do that, and it doesn't care what people think about me, you know, I don't care. So it enabled me to do things that I had been afraid to do.
Don't sweat the small stuff.
Now I'm a little bit more secure with myself, and I say to people, well, I'm here, just like you're here, and we all want the same things, so, you know, here I am, you can take me or leave me.
I think we recognize that most people are able to deal with what life throws at them, and we just need a little bit of time to know what our own coping strengths are and gather that strength and sense of control back. What I've learned through working with cancer patients is that in that time of shock, you think that you're totally out of control, but once you can gather some information, know what the resources are, know what the journey ahead might look like, I think what that sense of control starts to come back, and you begin to feel that you can master this, and that is my hope through all of it.
This video is designed to help you come to terms with living with cancer, the emotional perspectives, how you feel, how you think. And if you can, maybe you should get some help, because I know I needed some.
I would not wish cancer on anyone, but given that I had it, it's been a very powerful, transforming experience. So I'm thankful for that.
I don't think that chemotherapy and radiation and surgery is really going to cure cancer. I think it's going to be attitude and positivity.
And I can honestly say I have peace of mind now. I'm not afraid to die, but I want to live.
If you can work through the emotional, spiritual, psychological part of having cancer,
then you've got cancer beaten, whether you live or die.